All right, welcome everybody to the Intro to ArcGIS Pro training. First thing we like to do at all of our workshops is just give a little bit of a background about who we are and a little bit about the University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, which IGIS is a part of. So ANR is kind of we like to think of it as like the public outreach arm of the University of California. We are here to disseminate all of the research that's going on at the UC to the people in the local communities and around the state. IGIS is one of the statewide programs under the ANR umbrella, and our mission is to sort of provide support for geospatial tools and technologies to ANR as a whole, and also to external sources as well. ANR has cooperative extension offices in every county throughout the state, as well as 9, I believe, research and extension centers stretching from Oregon border down to the Mexico border, and several affiliated campuses as well. We've just added a few. It used to be 3, and I think we're up to 6 now. And for the team here today, presenting is going to be myself doing the intro here. I'm a GIS programmer with IGIS based at one of our research and extension centers, the Kearney Agricultural Research and Extension Center down near Fresno. Doing the main body of the workshop will be Sean Hogan, who is based out of Davis. And behind the scenes, we have actually a few more people than are shown here. Our director, Maggie Kelly, along with Genoa Stars, and I believe Ben Satzman and Andy Lyons are also here, all at the Berkeley campus. And Shane Fire, who is at another one of our research and extension centers up in Hopland in Mendocino County. Another thing we always do at the start of these workshops is find out a little bit about you. So what we're going to do here is go into the chat. You can put in your name, what you hope to learn from this workshop, and on a 1 to 5 scale, your experience with ArcGIS Pro. So let's open it up in the chat. Don't be shy. Who wants to go first? All right, thanks, Maggie. 3.5 on a good day. Jen, beginner, yeah, this is the place to be at the intro. Or when the sun shines. Nice, Ben. Yeah, we all at IJS like to say, depending on the day, we range widely over the experience scale. Sometimes we feel like an expert, other times we can't do anything. So, all right. Well, you can keep on bringing those into the chat, and we will continue on with the slides. Oops, there we go. Oops, I think I skipped one. No, I didn't. Okay, good. Okay, so first of all, why ArcGIS Pro? I mean, the one thing we like to say most about it, and I really think about this is, ArcGIS Pro and the Esri suite in general are kind of like the premier commercial GIS software out there. They're, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and it's really your best option for a lot of stuff. If you're working with geospatial data, it is very robust and has a huge, support network, and is just used incredibly widely. Some things that you can be doing with this software, if you want to produce, nice cartographic maps with very fine control, this is great for that. If you're working with multiple data sets and different projections, performing any sort of advanced analysis, whether it's with raster imagery, remotely sensed imagery, drone imagery, modeling, All of these kind of things are what this software does really well. Things that it does not do so well. Maybe not that it doesn't do so well, but issues in getting started with this software. It's a very steep learning curve. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and it can take a while to really learn where everything is in the software and what you can do with it. If you're going to be doing any sort of reproducibility kind of tasks, you're going to need to learn some coding, Python scripting in order to generate some of those automated workflows. It is not the most nimble of software, kind of piggybacking after that first thing, there's just a lot of stuff in there. There's tools upon tools, and you can really get lost in it. Also, it is not free. It is quite expensive for most people. Inside of the educational world, we usually get a bit of a discount, but it is a very pricey software. But all in all, we love it. We love Esri. This is the software that we do artwork in, the vast majority of the time. Okay, so a brief outline of what we are going to be covering today. First, we're doing these intro slides. We are going to learn a little bit about Pro and ArcGIS Online. We won't be using ArcGIS Online here, but it is sort of the counterpart, online cloud-based counterpart to Pro. We also do a training on that during the year as well. We're going to cover a little bit of the basics of GIS, data projections, analysis, and cartography. We're going to look a little bit at the data that we're going to be working with today in the workshop, and then we will move on to the workshop where Sean will walk you through the exercise, and you will bring in data and eventually at the end create a map. Okay, so basics of geographical information systems, or GIS, which is what we all love to do. So these are systems for acquisition of management, analysis, and dissemination of geospatial data, which is any data that is tied to a physical location on the Earth. This is made possible from the coincidence of spatial data features. This is your georeference data, your points, your lines, your polygons. You can do lots of stuff, very powerful with spatial analysis to derive or answer questions and derive products out of this spatial data. And you can also make really nice looking maps with cartography and design. So in the GIS world, there are basically two types of data. You have your vector data and your raster data. Vector data are your points, your lines, and polygons. It's all location-based, really sort of boiling down to the points. The points are the base of your vector data. You can have just a plain point layer with, something with an X and Y coordinate, or XYZ if you're working in 3D. And you can also do, connect those points together to make a line, or connect them and close them off to make a enclosed polygon shape. The spatial information is explicit. It is attached to each point and linked to a coordinate system. And it is linked into an attribute table. So you can have very large amounts of data connected to one single point, line, or polygon feature. Raster data, on the other hand, is essentially a gridded data set where you have, these different cells arranged into a grid rather than a explicit point that's tied to a very specific location. And these ones, you're going to have potentially, different resolutions for your data. It can be very fine scale, where you're almost getting down to the point level that you would get in a vector data set, or it can be a very coarse, wide-ranging data set. You can have one band or multiple bands, which is essentially, multiple layers of these grids stacked on top of each other, containing different values. For example, if you're doing, say, a very simple elevation surface, usually that's one band. It just has a series of elevation values. Whereas if you have something like, your traditional visible RGB image, you'll have three different bands, a red, a green, and a blue, that combine together to give you that image. And the spatial information here is implicit relative to the origin point of your data and the cell size. So some examples of vector data, once again, points, lines, and polygons. Your points can be, sample locations for research. It can be trees, which we will be working with today, centroids of a larger polygon data set, addresses, things of those nature. Lines can be things like roads, streams, contour lines, anything that's a linear feature. And polygons will be anything that covers an area, land use, land cover, census data, your boundaries of states, counties, etc. On the raster end, you can have things like a DEM. I mentioned an elevation surface. You can have your traditional remote sensed imagery in either RGB or multispectral. You can do, once again, land use and land cover also as a raster as well as a vector, depending on where you're deriving this data from. And downscaled climate information also can be a raster. And all of these have varying spatial resolutions, as you can see underneath them, ranging from, sub-meter to multi-kilometer cell sizes, depending on the data you're using and what the case is for using it. Okay, a short comparison of the two main Esri software environments, ArcGIS Pro, which we're going to be working in today, and ArcGIS Online. ArcGIS Pro is a desktop software environment. Everything is, performed locally on your local machine. You can access data from the cloud or access data that's local on your machine, but all of the processing and everything is done on your machine where the software is installed. Whereas ArcGIS Online is a cloud-based platform where everything is up on Esri servers, essentially. And all of the processing and stuff is done through their servers. So you can use it anywhere as long as you have a internet connection and a internet browser. It doesn't require, any sort of special stuff for your own machine. You could use it from a phone if you really wanted to, but it might not be the best user experience. Some of the strengths of each of these with ArcGIS Online, you can create web maps, web apps, you can link to apps. It has some analysis capabilities, not nearly as robust as ArcGIS Pro, but it's fast, intuitive, and as I mentioned, it's browser-based. You can use it from any device. ArcGIS Pro, on the other hand, is really great for doing really advanced, robust analyses, any sort of cartography. You really can't make a nice looking map in ArcGIS Online, but you can make great maps in Pro. And if you're doing any sort of reproducibility or coding, scripting, Pro is probably where you would be. The only note here is you need an organizational license and a Windows desktop computer, a 64-bit Windows desktop computer. Pro does not function in a Mac environment unless you're, dual booting Windows or something like that. Data, local versus cloud formats. Okay, I kind of covered, the local cloud split in that previous slide. In this case, when it comes to your data, you can have either local data, which is usually in a geodatabase or a shapefile that resides on your local machine and that you use from there and is only accessible through your local machine. And you can package it up and share it with someone else, but it's not something that you can easily have multiple users working on. Cloud data, on the other hand, is something that's stored up in the cloud on a server somewhere, whether it's Esri's servers and ArcGIS Online or your own ArcGIS Enterprise server that you've created. And that is something that you can pull down into Pro and work with locally, or you can use it in web applications. And it's also something you can easily share to anyone. Essentially, when you have your cloud data, you're sort of using layers and services. The layers are kind of the data, and services are instructions for how to access and use that data. Okay, sources for cloud data. They can be stored as a downloadable data set. You can essentially push up, a local data set like a shapefile or a geodatabase to something like ArcGIS Online or some other sort of server that you can then bring down to your local machine and use there. Or it can be a hosted feature layer, essentially, that it resides in the cloud and you access it from your local machine, but you're not actually downloading any data. You're using the data that is residing in the cloud. Okay, how about a little intro overview of projections? Okay, so the idea behind a map projection is the Earth is a three-dimensional object. It is not a perfect sphere. It's kind of pear-shaped and lumpy. And so in order to take that and put it onto a two-dimensional map, either a paper map, a web map that is on your computer monitor, which is still a two-dimensional two-dimensional environment, first we have to do a little bit of mathematical transformation to take that weirdly shaped lumpy object, smooth it out a little bit, apply a coordinate system to that, and then bring it down onto your two-dimensional plane. And in the process of this, you are always going to introduce some degree of distortion. No map projection is like a perfect one-to-one representation of the actual three-dimensional Earth. But it is what you got to do in order to get yourself a map. So you create a geoid that gets modeled as an ellipsoid. The link between them is what's known as a datum. And then you tie it together to that specific coordinate system. And that is what makes a projection. Some key projections that you would be using in California with California-specific data. First, we mentioned geographic, not really a projection per se. It's literally just the X and Y values of your data, raw and unprojected until you try to put it into something. It's not really something you want to use very often. A lot of times this is what you'll get out of data that's coming directly from being collected in, say, like a GPS unit. But you're usually going to want to project this into another projection before you actually use it for anything. A very popular one in California is the Teal Albers. It's specifically designed for California to mostly not necessarily used so much for analysis as it is for cartography, but you can use it for analysis too. It's a legitimate projection that will allow you to do real work in it. And it's very, like I said, it's very popular in California. UTM is a great projection system as well. These are the Universal Transverse Mercator. It's a worldwide coordinate system that's divided into a number of zones that are fairly narrow. For instance, like California, you can see is split between zone 10 and 11. It's really great for analysis, though, as long as you make sure you are in the correct zone for where you are located. I think there's also some people have put together, they call it like zone 10.5, which is kind of a combination of the two, which covers most of California, so you don't have to switch between zones. Also, we have state plane. Maybe not every, but most states have their own state-specific coordinate systems that are created and maintained by the state. In California, we are split into 7 different zones. Unlike a lot of projections that'll have the units that are in meters, state plane is usually in feet because, that's the way we do things here in the US of A. But it's great for analysis. It's something, if you're getting any sort of data from like a state level source, a lot of times it is going to be in the state plane coordinate system. And finally, we have Web Mercator, which is kind of Esri's projection that they use for web mapping. Anytime you're going to be pushing data up to sort of a web source, a lot of times it'll be reprojected into Web Mercator. And oftentimes you will find data that's on the cloud is in that projection as well. And you want to be a little bit cautious with analysis. It's not the best projection for analysis. It's good for web maps, but if you're going to be using it in a local instance to do anything with it, you should probably reproject it as something a little bit more friendly. Okay, so what can we do with GIS? Well, we got spatial analysis first and foremost. You can do a number of different tasks. Data collection is a very popular thing that people do. You know, they want to go out, they want to grab their own data that they can then use to either map or do analysis with, using things like GPS, you know, using imagery, things like that you can go out and collect yourself. This can be either raster or vector. You know, you can collect both of those. And you can do a lot of different stuff once you have it in. Vector analysis, you can do some overlaying, geocoding. You can geo-enrich features, which is essentially taking your data and joining new data to it, to either answer some sort of question or show something that you want to show at a different scale. In terms of rasters, there's a number of different analyses you can do there. You can aggregate and smooth data. You can, you know, do topography with elevation data. You can get slope out of that, aspect, which is essentially the direction your land surface is facing. You can create nice looking hill shades to use for cartographic purposes. You can model a lot of things using rasters, whether it's hydrology, whether it's some site suitability, surfaces. And you can also do some machine learning on remotely sensed data sets to either classify data, do change detection. Lots of really cool stuff that's coming out with a lot of these AI tools that are being developed. And then finally, of course, probably in a lot of people's minds, most important, cartography, you know, making a nice looking map. That is something that probably a lot of people, that's like their number one thing they want to do if they have a GIS. You know, they just want to make a really nice map. And that is something you're also going to be doing today. Okay, so a little bit of background about the area where the data comes from that you'll be working with today. This is data that we have collected from the Lynn Cove Research and Extension Centers, one of the 9 RECs that I mentioned earlier in the intro. This one in particular is a little bit southeast of Fresno, and mainly what they do there is citrus research. So they have a lot of different citrus plots with a lot of different varieties of citrus. Some of the data that we have for you is a digital surface model that has been derived from UAV imagery that we collected, as well as other drone image sources. We have some multispectral data that you will be using to create an orthomosaic and derive NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And there is also a point data set that is showing the locations of individual trees in one of the fields, as well as some tabular data that comes from the pack line there, which sorts and grades the fruit as it's harvested from the trees. So here is a kind of basic overview of what the software looks like. We have some annotations in here. At the top, you'll see there's a context-sensitive ribbon that looks very similar to something you'd find in, say, like any of the Microsoft Office tools. This is where all of your tools that you're going to be working with and everything that you're going to use to do your work in here is going to be located. On either side of the map below that, you will find a couple of what we call panes. On the left side is the contents pane. That is where you're going to find all of the data that you add to the map is going to be there. And on the right side, what's showing right now is the catalog pane, where you can go through all of the data sources you have for the project. But there can also be, if you see down at the bottom, there's like some tabs down there. You can stack a lot of panes on top of each other. So that's mostly where they will reside, is on the right side of your map. Okay, the tasks that we will be working on today. First, we are going to find and load the data for your project. It's going to be coming from both local and cloud sources. You'll get to go in and play around and experiment and look at the data and see what it's like. join the tabular data to the point data, do some queries of the attribute tables, make an interpolated surface, and finally produce a nice cartographic map. And yes, one of the most important things that you don't want to forget is cartography and design. This is really kind of ArcGIS Pro's strong suit. You know, you can make incredibly nice, detailed cartographic products. But you always want to be sure, as Ken Field down there in the corner says, go beyond the defaults. On the right, we have, I think we've labeled it as an accept the defaults map, but really this is like a specifically really intentionally bad map that I think it was Shane who made this, had to kind of work really hard to make it look this bad. But the idea is, you know, you want to make sure that when you're designing your map, you're being intentional and you're going through and trying to make decisions that are going to look nice and tell the story that you want to tell, and not just, you know, accept the defaults and say, yep, we're done. So here's an example of a nice looking map, similar to what you're going to be creating at the end of this workshop today. And some things to keep in mind is just, you know, make good use of your space, you know, don't clutter it up with things that aren't necessary. Make sure that you're highlighting what you want to be the main focus of, you know, the story you're trying to tell with your map. And really just, you know, think about your symbology, think about your layout, and try to make something that's, you know, both nice to look at, but also informative and, you know, doing what you want it to do. Okay, so next we are going to be getting into the meat of the workshop. Sean is going to be taking over. I think are we going to take a short break now, or are we going to jump right in?
No, I'm going to jump right in. I usually start off with a little hands-off, info-only section for about 20 minutes, and then we come back and then dive into the hands-on stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as we're going through this, you know, if you haven't gotten a license, if you need a license, if you need any help with setting up the software, reach out to us in the chat if you have any questions about that stuff while we're getting prepped for the workshop, and while Sean's like running through sort of his overview before we get into the actual hands-on.
Yep, exactly. And
All
Robert just, yeah, he read my mind. That's what I usually start off with talking about was, yes, getting your license set up. Every time that we do this workshop, I always go back and watch the video recording from the last workshop that we did on the similar or the same content. And the number one thing that we've run into difficulty in the past is people's licenses not having all the extensions they need. And that's one of the reasons why we ask people to get a license from ArcGIS for the workshop. You can get by if you have your own organizational account. I've set up the data in ways that if you can't run like a spatial analysis geoprocessing task, then it's not an issue, because there's data that's redundant in the folders that you can use instead, the process results. But it is always nicer to have the full-fledged licensing that we offer. Good. And so starting off, there's a couple little kind of housekeeping things that I like to begin every workshop with, just because this is also a hang up. And I know that most of you are probably experts in Zoom like we are after COVID, but all the same, it's important that we go over this. And I'm going to bring up my share screen, so you know what I'm talking about on this. Good. The first thing is how you lay out your windows. And everyone has a little different strategy of how they like to follow along with our online workshops. It seems to be one of the most popular, from what I gather, is that people like to listen to what I'm saying, set my window up onto one part of their screen, and then set up their own ArcGIS session on the other side of their screen, and then follow along with the steps as I go through. And I try to set my pace in such a way that everyone should hopefully have enough time to find the buttons and levers to get the data in, do the symbology of the features in their maps, and follow along with the exercise fairly well. Some people like to just look at the directions that should have come to you in an email this morning at about 9:47. that's important. So looking at my email from earlier, you'll see this. This is what you should have received. A couple important things in there are that you should have your ArcGIS application, and here's the directions for applying for that. If you don't have that right now, go ahead and put it in the chat. Robert or Shane can help you out with that. Whether if you're a UC affiliated employee or not, we can still set you up. And then the other couple important things is here's the data for the workshop that we'll be working with. And the other than having licenses that don't work, the next other thing that causes the most difficulty for people is that they download the data and they don't realize that they need to decompress it or unzip it into their drive. And we say to go to your C drive just because, or put it on your C drive in a folder named something to the effect of ArcGIS Pro Workshop. And unzipping it in there, because if it's zipped, you won't be able to have access to those files that are within it. And it just so you know, some of you may be working on a work computer that doesn't have a C drive. It doesn't necessarily have to be there, but it just having it at that high level on your computer file structure does help out, makes it a little easier to find. Good. And then next we have Robert's presentation is included in those links earlier, as well as the workshop directions. And besides following along with what I'm saying as we go, wherein I skip over some steps within the exercise and jump to and kind of smooth things out just to make sure that we have a glide path to finishing the workshop on time with all the key things that we want to cover. There's more extra steps within that exercise with labels called like optional. So if you want to know how to do more like editing or how to get different data from online, other kinds of things that we don't really have time to cover because we try to pack we have about 3 hours to cover about 6 hours worth of material, and we don't want to leave anything out, but we want to cover the key things that we wish we knew when we first started is kind of always the approach I take with workshops. Good. I'm going to close this so it doesn't pop up inside of my Zoom as I go. Good. So a little orientation to what we'll be covering often is best started off with kind of a description of what we're going towards. And this will be, as Robert noted in his presentation, this is a map that will be extremely similar to what hopefully we all will end up with in the end. And you'll see as we get going that we're going to bring in all kinds of different data and do some different analytical steps that won't end up on this. And this was intentional. I wanted to make sure that we provide all this information. But if you don't get through one thing, say you don't have the right license extension to be able to do a certain analytical step, it's okay. We want to make sure that we provide that information, but then in the end have something that we don't necessarily have to built through all the steps in case someone has a glitch. You can still follow along and end up with something that looks just like this in the end. Again, I like to put my ArcGIS my window right in the middle to work. I typically throw my directions over to the left in my case. Some of you might put my Zoom window over to the right. You'll have to figure out how to best use the real estate on your screen to, the way you prefer, but just try to figure out a way to leaf those things out is a good idea often. In the center here, back to the ArcGIS Pro session, and again, this is just info only. You won't have this information yet or this finished product, but just to show you where we're going with it, there's a couple things that I'd like to cover. And one is how is ArcGIS Pro, the application setup? And some of you might have had experience with the old ArcMap desktop application, and the functions within that have pretty much all been absorbed into ArcGIS Pro, plus a whole bunch of new things that you can do and different ways that you do it. With this interface, it's very different, and once you get the hang of it, it's really hard to go back. And that might not apply to many of you, but it's the way it is, at least for me. The one thing that's neat about ArcGIS Pro is that it has a contextual ribbon across the top that depends on what kind of view or set of data that you're working at. The center window that we're looking at here, sometimes we call it the window, sometimes call it the view. It's this in here, what we're looking at is a layout view as opposed to something like a map view. The map view shows all the data layers, whether they're rasters or vectors, along the left side in the contents, in this case, drawing order pane. So this would be the view window, and this to the side would be a pane. The same thing across the right side is another pane. We'll see how we can bring those up if they happen to disappear in a moment. Going from across the left to right, across the top, you have your project tab. It has a bunch of different information that we don't really need to get into. Licensing is something that we look at once in a while, but we don't need to worry about that, except for saving project initially. We might use that there, but we can also do the same thing clicking the save disk at the top left-hand corner. Won't worry about that tab very much. The map tab. This is where we'll most often be working from. In your map tab, you have all of these different tools across the top of your window, including the Explore option. The Explore option lets you move around your data or your map data within your window. This is an important note, is that sometimes you'll use another tool, for example, a selection tool. If I select on that and I end up selecting some features, something on my screen, I can't then navigate around, drag and drop as well. And so to get back to that function, using the Explore tool will get us back so we can grab and move our window around, or our map view around. Important. Among these other functions, there's also these zoom options. You can go to a global full extent that jumps you way out to the full extent of the map. And then there's this back arrow that will bring us back to that view extent. Those extents are based upon the data that's within the contents. What scale of data do they include? In case of some of these data sets, they're pretty close to global, and that's why it zoomed it so far out when I went out to full global scale. Some of the other important things I mentioned, the select tools, there's measurement tools, you name it. You'll end up using these occasionally, but just know that they're there. Moving on, the insert tool. This is pretty important, and especially once we get going, one of the very first things that we'll do is we'll add a data folder connection, because we want to be able to access our data easily, and by selecting a pathway right to where our data is at that we've downloaded and unzipped on our C drive specifically in this case, this will help expedite finding our data easily. There's also the map views and the layout views. This is how I have added these different map views in here. So in this case here, we're looking at this map view that I added previously for this map project. I've also added in a call out map, and put together, they end up with this final layout that we have here. The same thing applies to that super ugly map that Robert showed. Here's the ugly layout that he displayed that was grotesque and kind of hard to even make myself make. It's just, it's just terrible. The crazy thing is I've actually seen maps almost this bad that have been published before. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes you have to check your creativity, or at least steer your creativity in the right way. So you send a nice clean message of what you're intending. And that's usually the objective of most maps, is to send some form of a message, whether it's like a data results or for reference, you name it. It's you want to have the most important things pop out. In this case, you can see that we want to have this field, and in this case, the pack line data, which we'll explain a little bit later, what the weight of navel oranges are from each of these trees. And sometimes with a call out, this is called up on the top right-hand corner for reference. All of that we'll show you how to do, as well as adding in all of these other data or these map elements. So here's one of the key things that is different from a map view. You'll see the content on the side consists of, in this case, point data related to the weight of the navel oranges. There's all these other layers that are in here, including a mosaic, in this case, a color infrared mosaic in the background behind that data. If we switch over to a layout view, in the layout view, it switches from that data to instead be map frames, scale bars, north arrows, legends, and that sort of things. One of the things that the Esri, the parent company of ArcGIS, has done is proliferate this style of referencing your content, where you'll have your basic content on your left, and if you want to do something with it, you click on, say, this, or double click it for your properties, and the options for that will conditionally show up on your right side. So the whatever you can work with is on the left, and then the options for sometimes editing or changing symbology or that sort of thing will pop up on the right. Same thing applies for over here. If I want to bring up a boundary symbology, I click on that a couple times and then it'll pop up on the right. So this orientation of just where to kind of look to, hopefully will help you out once you get going. Good. Besides that, something that is very common in ArcGIS Pro now, everything is called a geoprocessing tool. And so if I click on this tools button, you'll see the geoprocessing pane pop up on your right. At least that's the way it defaults on my screen. If it doesn't show up like that, if it's off the right side, which sometimes is set up on some people's machines, you can grab that, drag it, and click it to this little anchor button, and then it'll show up on the right side of your screen. This is the way I like it. Some people have their own preferences, but I prefer to have my panes on this side show up here. Good. So that's under tools. One thing that's interesting about ArcGIS Pro, again, having a conditional pane, is if I were to click on, say, trees, some processing tools will work on that, some won't. This gets more important when we're using the edit and imagery tabs over here, though. View, I mentioned before that I just touched on briefly for 1 second, was that this is how you can bring up these panes to the left or right. Say, for example, I accidentally closed my contents pane. If I go to view and go find my contents pane, that's how I can bring it back up. If I happen to close out my geoprocessing pane, which I often do, I can go to view and bring up geoprocessing. Nice thing about geoprocessing is that there's all these different toolboxes that are in here. There's so many tools, like hundreds of tools in here. And it's kind of overwhelming, especially when you first start out. But the nice thing is that you can search for things like clip, for example. I can just type in clip and it'll give me a whole bunch of different clipping options. If you want to do some form of analysis in ArcGIS Pro and you're not sure what words to use, I might recommend going to Google and just typing in ArcGIS Pro, how do I do this? And about 90% of the time it'll get you there. So I say sometimes I'm like on my very best days, if I'm working with tools that I'm familiar with, I might be like close to an expert on ArcGIS Pro. On the days that I'm not working with something I'm familiar with, a little bit of Google will get me there really quick, and then and you'll find that your learning curve goes up really quick once you figure out how to search for the right things. And also, our Esri does have quite a lot of resources online that you can refer to for figuring out how to do things. Good. So this is your geoprocessing pane over here. We'll get to the catalog pane also. This is kind of like a library where we can find all of our data very easily that we want for a given project. Editing tools. This this is where we can edit, say, trees or vectors. Vectors being different than rasters in that a vector is a point, line, or polygon, and a raster is like a grid of cells, just like a picture with pixels. So there's when it comes to the editing tools I mentioned before, conditionally, I have, say, create and modify if I'm highlighting, say, trees here. But if I go down to a raster, that you can't edit a raster in the same way. And some of the directions for doing that kind of stuff are in the directions that are provided, but I don't know that we'll have time to get into editing. We might just touch on it, but there's given the amount of time, might skip past some of that stuff. Imagery, the next one in line. This is something we'll be playing with a little bit today, just because I have found in the past, Robert touched on this appropriately, the cartography part of mapping is often what people find to be the most fun. At least that's the case for me. It's just making things look nice, or just playing with that is just it's fun. It brings out our creativity, and it's just an interesting thing to do. We'll be working with that quite a bit today throughout the whole workshop. There's and that includes different stylization or symbology of points, lines, polygons, and rasters. In those rasters, whether they're a false color image like we're looking at here, as opposed to an elevation model. We look at that as well. So we'll be playing with some of these different raster functions. We'll skip some of the things like georeferencing, which means shifting a raster to a different position. So there's we'll be looking at these. We'll skip share. We'll skip planet imagery. That's a plugin that we have. Raster layer. There are some neat things in here, including how to change your symbology that I talked about, a false color infrared. We can look at something like this and see if there's different ways we can have an RGB composite. We can have a single band or stretch of a data set, and that's usually preferable for something like an elevation model as opposed to an RGB imagery like that we're looking at here. But there's different ways we'll style our data, and we'll see that more. And then finally, moving over to data, we're going to be skipping that for now. Good. So that is the brief overview of what you see across the top, just so when we come back to this in a bit, you'll kind of get the idea of map, insert, analysis, all these different tabs, knowing that they just have different functions that will be associated with them, whether it's bringing up your pane or working in your map, adjusting your data, and so forth. One last thing, it's one nice thing that Esri has done with ArcGIS Pro is that they've set it up so it has automatic saving. So if it crashes, which it used to do a lot and now it doesn't do too often, is that it'll automatically save, but it's still a good idea to save your project at the top once every so often. And that is especially true before you run kind of a more in-depth analysis that might freeze it or break it, or say your computer battery runs out and you need to plug it back in. You need one of those things. You don't want to lose all your work. Good. Well, I think that's good for just a basic overview. There's not too many of us here in today. Sometimes we have dozens of people for this workshop, but and that's partly because a lot of people will sign up for the workshop and then watch it online. And this will be coming out sometime mid next week. And if you want to refer back to that, the data and the exercise will be down in the video description that'll be up on our UCANR-IGIS YouTube channel. And I typically send an email out to all the participants when it gets up on roughly around Wednesday of the week following the workshop. Also, as we go through this, note we'll usually plug this at the end, but not everybody has a chance to stick around until the end on a Friday. IGIS offers office hours on Monday and Tuesday afternoons. being that there's not too many of us, it should be pretty easy to answer most people's questions today. But in the event that you have questions that are kind of more in depth, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. But if it gets even more in depth, you can sign up for office hours through the IGIS website. You just get Google UCANR-IGIS, and if you look for, I think it's under resources, you can look in there for office hours, and then there's a sign up sheet for sessions. And that refers to anything from our GIS to drones to geodatabases, you name it. We got someone that can help you out. Good. With that said, let's take a break until 2:05. Usually we'll start off with a 10-minute break and then a roughly 5-minute break for every half hour or so thereafter. And in this break, if you do need to just decompress, get your data downloaded and unzipped into your folders, into your C drive specifically, like I've done here, I have to put it a layer down further, such as I put it, let's see, I'm going to go in my C drive. I have an ArcGIS Pro workshop, and then I have my ArcGIS Pro workshop data. That should be probably the name of the file that you bring down, and then you'll see inside of that. Once that's downloaded, you'll want to right-click it and then unzip it in your workshop folder so you can get at it easily during the exercise. Good. So what we'll do is the next step, we're going to add some data into a project and then do some basic symbology or change the styles of the data sets that we're adding into our project. Just something that I usually mention earlier than this, but then didn't this time around, was that it's a good idea to have a trackball or a mouse for pretty much any time you're working with the GIS software. If you're trying to do this with the touchpad on your laptop, it's going to be extremely difficult unless you're much better at that than I am. But just a tip, if you happen to have a mouse or a trackball around somewhere handy, you might want to grab it. Good. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll start an ArcGIS Pro exercise. And to do that, you might have it already anchored on your taskbar. You might have to find it in your files, or search for it for, say, ArcGIS Pro, and then start a new session. When that comes up, if you have just added it to your computer, you might have to log in with the credentials that you recently received, or re-log in if it's timed out, or if you've switched from one computer to another and you have an account. But once that comes up, this will be something like what you'll see. In my case, I got a bunch of projects that I've worked on recently down the bottom. This time, though, we're going to start with something new. And with that, we'll click on Map. When a new map comes up, what it does is we're going to set up a location where we want to put our project. And going with the default is not what I recommend. You can change, by the way, the default location. I haven't on this computer because I always put things in different places anyways. But what you'll want to do is go over and click on the browse option. Hopefully everybody's come back from the break. So this is the hands-on stuff again. So we bring up ArcGIS Pro. Just repeat that in case someone's just trickling back in. We click new project map, set our location. In your case, you might want to put it in the same file folder where you just unzip the data from this morning on your C drive in the ArcGIS workshop folder that you created. In my case, I'm going to probably put this on my C drive in my trash folder, because every time I do this workshop, I don't need another redundant option, and then I can clean that out every so often and not use up my hard drive space or clutter up my C drive. But so for you, you might want to put it in your ArcGIS workshop folder. I'm going to do it a little different than you do. And I'm going to click OK. So that's where my project is going to go. Then I'm going to put in a name. I'll say just ArcGIS workshop exercise. And I don't know, I might, yeah, that's probably fine. I've probably emptied my trash since the last time I did this. So I'll leave that name there, and it'll create a new folder for this project. One thing to note, when it does this, it creates a geodatabase that's specific for your ArcGIS Pro project in that folder. And I click OK. So if you'd like to follow along with that, yeah, go for it. Good. So what you'll see here, we have our map view that automatically comes up in the center window. You got your drawing order and your contents, but we don't have anything in there except for the default topographic map background. You probably won't have symbology and all these other things pop up on your right, because that's just the way it was the last time I had this open. But now we do want to add some data in here. And in my case, it automatically defaulted to having the Insert tab automatically displayed at the top. If that isn't the case, you want to click on that Insert tab. And we're going to go down to Add Folder Connection and click on that. The reason for that is that, again, you're going to want to be able to find your data fairly easy. And in my case, I have put it in my ArcGIS Pro Workshop folder. I'm going to be a little level deeper than you might be. And then I'll click on my ArcGIS Pro Workshop data once and click OK. That way I can always go to that file location easily when we add data, which is what we're going to do in just a moment. So just so you know, you added a folder connection, navigate to your drive where you put it, make sure that you connect to your unzipped file folder or folder that you downloaded earlier, and then select that location and OK. If you're trying to go to a zip file folder, the rest of the stuff won't work for you, we found. Good. Next, we're going to go back to map, and I'm going to show you two ways to add data in. The first of which is the old style conventional way, and you'll see this little plus sign. Depending on how far out my window is stretched, you'll see either add data and a plus sign that's bigger, or you'll see a little teeny plus sign on a folder if it's condensed back down. But that's your add data option here. And I will click on that. And it went to the last place that I had got data from when I was playing with this workshop exercise earlier today. But instead, in your case, you'll go up to your project and you see the folders option. Click on that, and you'll see the data folder that you want to access. That was the purpose of doing the shortcut, as we started off with. And then I'll click on that. And inside of that, I have all these different layers of data that we want, or data sets. We have boundary for the Lynn Cove Research Extension Center. DSM stands for Digital Surface Model, Digital Terrain Model, Mosaic, NDVI. That's something we won't really work with today, but I like to add in extra data, because part of the learning process is figuring out how to organize your data and layer things over the top of other things in kind of an intuitive sort of way. And so I put in more data than you'll be working with, especially by the end map that we'll be creating. We'll have pack line data. In this case of this project, the pack line data is non-geographic data. It's just tabular data that comes from trees that were collected at the Lynn Cove Center for the weight of each of the trees binned tags for those given trees. And then that's how we will connect that data that would come from this packline machine or monitoring system that measures like color and weight and those sorts of things for the fruit. So that's just like tabular data. Projects, and that's something that I've created. You might not have that in there. And then projects is the areas of the research center, and then trees. One thing to note is later in the exercise, in the event that you have a license that doesn't have access to ArcGIS Online, I've put in the tree layers that you might need for the workshop within there. For right now, we're going to go to Mosaic. Click on Mosaic, and inside of that, you'll see F 41 North drone MS for multispectral mosaic. Here's a little tip. If don't do what I'm about to do, just watch for now. If I double click on this, what you'll see is the 5 bands, spectral bands that were collected by the drone. So that's blue, green, red, red edge, and near infrared. So those, instead of just being RGB, red, green, blue, it's blue, green, red, and then has a couple more outside of our visible spectrum bands, as they're called, uh, parts of the layer. So we don't want to double click in and get in this deep, because we want to load them all as one file. So instead I will back up to where you were at there, just click once and then click OK. And what this will do is it'll load in our study area into the map. So a thing of note is that once you load any file into your project, the first thing that goes in is going to dictate the projection of your project overall. You can change that, but the first file coming in, whatever projection it's in, is going to be the projection of the project. In this case, it would be UTM Zone 11 North, or Universal Transverse Mercator Zone 11 North. Every drone that I know of uses the Universal Transverse Mercator coordinate system. It's a projected coordinate system because it's intuitive for most people and works good at the scale of drone flights. It's in meters, so it's distant. So if you look along the bottom of the screen here, you'll see this 315, 240, whatever number. That's the easting, and then there's a northing. The northing is from the equator. The easting is from a meridian that's a baseline of reference. In case it's like 122 degrees, or no, 118 degrees of longitude happens to be the meridian. But anyways, it's the east distance from that location. So it's good for California in general. Zone 11 is east of where roughly the longitude of Lake Tahoe, and Zone 10 is right. And that's in the weeds. I don't need to dig into it, but you'll run into that, and it's an issue for some people in the future. One of the ways that we can look at that while we have just one file in here, and before we get a whole bunch more in, the other way I like to load data is, let's look at the options that are available under this layer. I'm going to right click on that. I might, go ahead and do that as well. And you'll see a variety of options. Copy, you can copy and then repaste it in your map. We'll get to group later. One of the things, we have symbology. We don't need to touch on that yet. But one thing I'd like to do is go all the way down to properties and click on this. And of particular interest is source. If we click on source, it'll give us a bunch of information. The location of where you're bringing this in from, the name of it, the vertical units, if it's got, in this case, it doesn't make sense because it's a RGB like orthomosaic, but the units, the raster information and the spatial reference are both interesting. Particularly the spatial reference is what I was talking about before. This shows the projected coordinate system, the WGS 84 UTM Zone 11 North Transverse Mercator. So just so you know, if you want information about a file, that's how you do it. You go into your into the properties. The other way you can get to the properties on that is just double clicking it, and it'll bring up properties. Good. Now that we have one layer in there, and it came in, by the way, is showing a red equals blue, green equals green, but blue is being represented as red. And this is something that we don't necessarily want. That doesn't make sense. And one thing that I do typically to make this workshop just run smoother all the way to the end is I will not wait all the way until the end of the workshop to tell you how to change your style or symbology. I'll just do it once we bring files in each time. And with that, let's change this style so it's more appropriate. We can do it a couple different ways. One is that we can just right click on this the actual color in here and say we want maybe red to be red, green to be green, and then right click on blue and say blue is blue. And then it gives a more true color representation of the terrain. You'll see also that automatically the symbology of it comes up along the right side. This is, and I'll stretch it out just so you can see it a little bit better. The default typically is a stretch type called percent clip. Sometimes Esri is another one if it's has a default Esri stretch. That is the kind of the contrast and the brightness of different colors within the scene based on its spectral histogram. If we do the drop down arrow on that, you'll see a number of other options in here. One other one that sometimes is interesting is standard deviation, and it'll clear it up in this case, I know from past experience. And then it gives even a better representation of what the surface looked like in true color. One thing that we will do next, though, is because I'm a remote sensing guy. I've been working with remote sensing data for, I don't even know how long now, a long time. And when I look at vegetation, I prefer looking at it with false color infrared. And the reason for that is that near infrared and the red edge part of the spectrum has a much higher contrast when it relates to healthy vegetation versus not as healthy a vegetation or stress vegetation. It just highlights essentially green, healthy vegetation. So what we're going to do is another way of styling this. We will click on this, go up to imagery at the top. Oops, my bad. Raster layer, my bad. I was thinking raster layer and imagery is easy to get backwards. And then we have the stretch type right here and symbology. So you can see the stretch type, and then there's the symbology. We're going to, in this case, we'll go stay with the RGB to keep this up, but let's change this this style over here to go from red to instead be the near infrared, the green to be red, so we're offsetting everything, and then the blue is going to be green. So in short, that is for CIR, or color infrared. And then this is going to be what our scene is that we'll be working with later on to kind of replicate what we ended up seeing here in this layer in the end. Good, what we're working toward. Now, that was just a little intro to playing with symbology. Let's go back to adding data. And now the way we're going to do it is the way I prefer to do it, is that we're going to go to the View tab across the top and click on Catalog Pane. So there's View, and right below that should be Catalog Pane, and that'll show up on your right-hand side. And then you'll have that Folders option again, and under the drop-down of that, you click the little arrow, or the little triangle, you'll see the shortcut that we created earlier. Click on that. And what we'll do is we'll add in each one of these layers. We can start off right from the top, boundary, grab that. And what we can do, there's a couple ways you can do this. One is you just grab that and drag it onto your window and drop. But that'll put it up at the top of your window. And so you can't see what's under, like whatever's underneath it. You'll see that whatever is in your drawing order here is going to be displayed at the very top level as if you're looking down on it. You can get around that by dragging this other layer back on the top, and then you'll see the LREC boundary below it. If I use my roller, I can roll out, and you can see then it shows the boundary of the area. We'll change the symbology of these things here in a moment. Let's go to digital surface model, still over here in the catalog on the right-hand side, DSM, and we can drag in both of these. So drag them this time all the way over and maybe put them below. You can see how the line appears in the drawing order, and just drop them there. That one you won't see because it'll be buried underneath the image that we pulled in, but the next one will. If we drag that over, it'll pop up and you'll see this black and gray white area that appears. We'll change these things around in a moment so it's clearer. We have the digital terrain model. Let's not worry about that one for right now. It's just the digital surface model is like top of canopy height. Digital terrain model is subtracting everything above ground. Don't really need to play with that. It's for if you feel like working with this data later on, you can. Mosaic, we can grab that and drop it in, but we've already done that. We'll go down to NDVI. Let's just, for fun, we'll put this in there. And then we'll go down further yet. We'll skip Packline. We'll do that last. Projects. So most importantly, we'll put both of them in for now. There's the 41 North Field. We can put that in. We're going to need that later. And we'll put in the LREC projects layer. If it doesn't look just like what I'm doing, don't worry. We'll work with it. And then lastly, we have trees. Let's not put those in there because I'm going to show you how to get those layers into your project from online as a way or approach of getting data into your project, not just from files that you have on your local drive, but rather from online. So we're going to skip those. But I wanted to have these files available to anybody that doesn't have ArcGIS Online access later on. And then I mentioned we could do the Packline data last. We look at that, that's just a CSV file. It doesn't have spatial reference yet, but it does have unique ID numbers in the data set that will match up to the tree data that we'll bring down from online. With that, we'll just grab that and drag it over and drop it here, but you'll find that you don't see it right away no matter where you put it because it ends up at the very bottom. We'll come back to that shortly. Now, here's the thing when you're putting data into your project, the conventional wisdom is that you want to have the smallest things on top and then like layer them down below, like from small, usually points, lines, then polygons or smaller polygons, and then larger polygons and so forth. Depends on what the objective of your map is, but that's just a rule of thumb that you generally go with initially. In this case, we might put the field at the top, and you'll see it just covers up a portion of this field here that we're looking at. If I turn it off, you'll see it here and then back. So that is actually the 41 North field, specifically navel oranges in this case. One thing that of note, some of these files have come down from online. So they're usually when you have online data, not always, but often or most often, it's in some form of web Mercator projection. And the way we can look at that here, same as double clicking on the raster layer or right clicking and going to the bottom. So I can right click and go to the bottom, go to the properties, or I can double click it. Oops, I had to double click it fast. It'll bring me to the properties. And if I go to the source and then the spatial reference on this one, you'll see that it's in Web Mercator instead of Universal Transverse Mercator. We'll want, in some cases, you'll want to try to change the projection of your layers into something uniform. And that's most important when you're doing analyses with your data. Sometimes if you try to do analyses between projections, you'll either get bad or not as good of results as you're hoping for. But let's change some things other than just projection. So I X'd out of that, and I want to change a little bit of symbology. One, I'm going to click on this layer that just came in, and we just click on it. Well, there's two ways you can do it. You can either click on the layer and go up to feature layer to be able to go to symbology, or you can just click on the box that's underneath it. In my case, it came in as a yellowish box. In your case, it might be a little different. But if I click on that, or symbology up here, the same difference almost happens. The only difference is if you click on it up here, you have to actually go and click on the symbol here to get to the same place. So if you saw that, if I clicked on it up here, you have to go and click on the symbol, the yellow box, to get into the various options. In the case of this field, let's just go with something easy for now. We'll go with a black outline. I'll show you how to go with more complex options here in some of the next steps. One thing that's of interest is that sometimes you'll get zoomed out or you won't be able to find layers that you're looking for. See how, like, if you looked at all of these layers here, it might be hard to find that. What you can do is right click, and this is very handy, is go down about halfway. There's the zoom to layer, and I can click on it and it'll bring you right to that layer that I'm looking for. If it happens to be underneath something else, it'll still zoom to the same level. And then you need to look for, like, just bring it up to get it above whatever's covering it up. If that makes sense. So now we're down to just the FN north layer. If I turn that off and turn this off, you'll see that it's also included in the projects layer that's down below, the LREC projects. For now, we can turn off LREC projects. It's just useful to have this. And then we have the NDVI. We can turn off the layer above. I'm just showing you what different types of data might look like. Here's NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And what that shows is it highlights healthy vegetation. So you can see how all the plants pop out and everything else is dark. If I turn on the mosaic again, you'll see that there's again, it's red instead of the bright white, and you see vegetation in the pond. I assume that's algae or something like that that's growing on there. I'm not going to worry about playing with the NDVI right now, but it's there for you to play with later if you feel so inclined. So we can turn that off, and we can turn off this, and we'll see a digital surface model that's included there as well, with the brightest areas being the highest elevations and the darkest being the lowest. We're going to play with that a little bit. And then we'll have the DSM. You can close, and then here's the whole rec DSM. You can notice that this one's has a different contrast, and that's because the stretch of the larger area covers a much wider, much larger span from a lower elevation to a higher elevation. Now, one thing that we can do that might simplify things just a little bit sometimes, and this is something I like to do often, is create layer groups. This NDVI and this smaller DSM, we're not going to work with a whole lot. So, or if we did, we might just want to have them in a folder that are easy to get to. So this is something I like to do for just tidying up the contents. Very common practice. I do this almost every project that I work on. Is I can click one and click Control and click the other. So those two are both highlighted. And then I can right click that and then go up to, let's see, where is it at? Group, all the way at the top, third one down. So click Group, and it puts those into a group of a new group layer. If I click on that a couple times, once, twice, slow, I can highlight over it. Just once is fine, slowly. You don't want to double click or you'll go into properties. I could just call this rasters for now. If this is going too quick for you, don't worry. It's following along fine, but I'm going to click enter. And the value of that is then I can just reduce those and kind of hide them without having to have them kind of cluttering up my contents. All right. So now you can see that the contents just got slightly tidier. Let's do one more thing. First, we'll bring up the LREC boundary. So it's actually two more things. LREC boundary, so it comes up a little higher. And let's change the symbology of this just a little bit and make it a little bit more, I don't know, just cleaner. So we'll click on that. go over to so we clicked on that, is what I'm referring to as the little green patch that's below the LREC boundary. That's how I like to get into my symbology instead of going up to feature layer and then symbology, the kind of the long route. You'll see that that ArcGIS Pro offers a number of ways to do the same thing. And some are quicker than others once you get the hang of it. But just clicking on that little, in my case, turquoise box, we'll go over, click on the black outline, but that doesn't show up against that dark layer. So what we can do is go up to properties. So you see gallery and properties, and I'll click on properties. And right here, I can go down to the outline color and change it into something, say, kind of a sort of dark blue, and click apply. We could also change the outline width if we wanted. And now you can see it pop out a little bit better. Good. Now, one more thing. I said two things we're going to do is the next one is kind of a small series of steps to make your raster look good, and then we'll take a little break. And the raster that I'm referring to is the LREC drone DSM, or digital surface model. And that gray stretch just doesn't do it for me. But there is one thing that does look nice. If you click on the stretch, the value symbology symbol here, you'll see it pop up on the right side of your screen. And for color scheme, let's pick something called elevation 1, I think. So if you go down just a little bit, a couple strands, here it is. If I hover over this elevation number 1, where it goes like turquoise to this kind of semi-earth toned rainbow, you'll see that pop up. Now, it looks better in my opinion, but it's not ideal yet at all, especially with all that turquoisey kind of blue around the outside. So let's find out what that color is. This is something, by the way, that if you're working with rasters and trying to make cool looking maps, this does come up often enough. And that is that we want to change that. We want to get rid of areas using a masking tool. And the way we can do that is we can go over to the map tab at the top, click on map. Then we'll go to explore, click on that. And then let's click on that turquoise area on the outside. And you'll see that it comes up as 0. And it shows the LREC drone DSM 0. If I clicked inside, it's going to come up for the boundary layers, the first thing that it sees. Because that's when you click on that explore, I just X'd out of it. It refers to whatever's the top layer. Sometimes you have to move things to the top, or you have to turn things off above, is usually more preferable to find out. But if in this case, we're just interested in the top layer, and it shows the pixel value is 0. If I turned off what was above it, the LREC boundary, and I clicked on it now, I will see that in this case, this is 145 meters high. If I go to the hilltop, it's 173 meters, or 174 almost high. But let's get rid of this 0 area. Well, that doesn't make sense. It's just like, that's an extra extent that just happens to be in the boundary area of the layer. And the way we do that is when we already have the symbology set, like displayed over there. Otherwise, we'd still click on this. We go over to the bottom of the right-hand pane. Down, the third option is mask. And then we just click on display background values is 0. In this case, it shows it as no color. So it has no color. And then you have like a clean outside. Something else that we can do to make this look really cool, it's kind of a little 2-step process, is that we can go up to the raster, go up to imagery at the top tab, imagery, while this is still highlighted. And we can go to the raster functions. Oops, I'm thinking I'm doing the right thing. Raster functions, click on this. remembering the direction order. There's steps in order that are important. And here we want to click in hill shade. If you just type in hill, it'll get us most of the way there. And we can click on the hill shade option. So again, at the top, imagery, the raster functions, that'll pop up here, type in hill and it'll get you there. Select the raster as being the LREC drone DSM. Hill shade type, I kind of prefer the multi-directional. And then the rest of the defaults are fine. And then click the create new layer at the bottom. See how we've made that neat kind of grayed area? Now, let's take that, drag it in your contents. So that we're in the drawing order level. So we'll drag that, draw it down to right below the DSM. So we bring it down below the digital surface model. Now click on the drone DSM. And by the way, if any of this stuff, I'm moving a little too quick for anyone, don't hesitate to throw your hand up in the chat. If you're missing any of this stuff, this is, I mean, it's fun to go through these steps just so you can see how to do them, because we want to just build the skills that you start getting used to how to drag and move files around. If you don't get any of this stuff, don't worry about it whatsoever. It's not going to matter when it comes to the final product. It's just to make sure that we kind of redundantly show you steps on how to do, wouldn't say similar things, but just show you some of the neat tools while reinforcing some of the common steps that we take. Good. Once it's over here, I'm going to do something else, and that is I'm going to go up to image raster layer this time and move over to the left, and we're going to go with layer blend. Okay, note I have to have the LREC drone DSM highlighted. This is where conditional ribbons really matter on this one. So I have to have this, see how it's blued on there. If I click below, I need to click back up to the LREC drone DSM when we have the raster layer tab highlighted. Next to layer blend, we're going to click normal, go down to darkening modes, multiply, and click darken multiply, and look at that neat looking digital surface model now. Really makes it pop out. You can imagine there's a lot of use cases for doing it this way. Very good. Okay, so I think it's going pretty well. I don't see any okay, someone asked about going through adding the data phase again. Okay, so here's something we're gonna do. We're gonna add data in a different way. That's hopefully going to be useful for you as well. I will show you how to, I'll just quickly review how we add data, my favorite way of adding data, but then I'm going to show you another similar way to add data from online right now. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Good. And by the way, I kind of rearrange things as I go through this. I do it from memory, but I mentioned before to keep the workshop moving at the right pace to get everything done, I kind of try to take sharp edges off, and while we have a data set right in front of us, I try to do the symbology steps on those right at that moment, and then continue, then move on to the next step. Sometimes I skip a step and then I come back to it. If you're following the directions like line by line, they're set up that way for a reason in there, to just so if you have to reference just how to add data, it's all there. And if you want to reference how to do symbology, it's more kind of clumped together for the directions. But for the sake of just keeping it efficient, I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it now, where I do bring in a layer and then symbolize it, and then bring in a layer and then symbolize it. So back to adding data. And the way that we did it before, the way I like to do it, is if I go up to view and click on catalog pane, you'll see this pop up probably on the right side of your screen. Because the last place I added data from was right along was on the right side. It should probably pop up that way for you too. Under folders, where we made the link, we have all of these ArcGIS Pro data layers. We just drag and drop those in there, drag and drop them in, either onto the map pane and then rearrange the order there, or grabbing them and dragging them over and plugging them in there. And by the way, you can add them in there more than one time if you wish. Sometimes you want to do that to, not right now, but sometimes you'll want to do that if you want to play with style of one and you don't want to have the same style apply to the other one. We'll kind of see how to do that when we do the call outs here shortly. So that's one way of adding data. The other way of adding data is through the portal. So we have portal that will add data in through, in our case, because I'm logged on, it shows my content from my ArcGIS Online. So I have access to all that data just right at my fingertips. One of the beautiful things about modern day ArcGIS Pro or GIS in general is that there's hundreds of thousands of data resources online or data layers. I mean, across the world, there's so much data that's available, either through just various online sites. ArcGIS itself, or Esri, has a ginormous collection of data. There's Living Atlas, which is associated with it, but it also has its own layers. But there's so much online data. There's a couple of ways to get to it, though. There's the catalog pane way of doing it, and then there's also a catalog view. So if we go up to the view option again, we see the catalog pane, and we also see the catalog view. Just to switch it up a little bit, let's click on the catalog view. Under view, catalog view here. And here it's very similar to the catalog pane, but it just gives us a little bit more information, and it pops up in the center of our screen, so it makes it a larger kind of priority. You also have the folder options that you can go through, and it will show. So it doesn't show any metadata in any of these. So there's some various options. One thing that we can do, though, is on the left-hand side under portal, we see the my content, kind of like we saw over here, my content, and then there's my favorites, there's my groups, my organization, same thing that's over here on the left-hand side. But down further, we can click on ArcGIS Online. And it brings up everything, both from the United States and clearly from other places in the world. But we can do a search here in this window. And in this case, let's just look for NAIP imagery. This is going to be included in our final map, and then click enter, NAIP. It'll show up here, and you can see NAIP imagery options. There's a US NAIP imagery, NDVI. There's all these variations. There's natural color, US NAIP. By the way, the same option can be done under Living Atlas. They have the same layers in there. Let's just click on the first one, and what you'll see is metadata. And metadata, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to look in the catalog view, because it's easier to see metadata. It gives you information and descriptions of the data that you're looking at. So this is one way of just perusing what's out there in this ginormous curation of data. Another way the next thing we can do is we can right click on that and click add to map, and it'll just add it into our map. We don't see it quite yet because we're still in the catalog pane or catalog window or view. But when we X out of this, so see the catalog, just next to that, click close, and you see a big satellite image that's in the background. Or not even satellite, excuse me. NAIP is an airborne platform. It's collected every 2 to 3 years in about 2/3 of a meter resolution. Good quality imagery overall. But you can see that if I toggle that on and off, we can drag that down to the bottom and have that be as a back layer that's in the background. Might turn off my hill shade for now. You can turn off the other one too. So he has this layer. Here's the value of this as opposed to the other reference layer. So you see below that is one of the reasons why I brought it in just now, to show you a little bit of a difference. There is a base layer, a variety of base layers that are options here. So we see the world topographic map is one of the last things that comes in, and that's a default right from the beginning. We can change that by going up to map, the top tab. So we go up to the top map, and then you see base map, and you can click the drop down for that. By default, we see there's the world topographic map. But we sometimes, depending on what the interests of our project are, we might want dark gray canvas, hybrid imagery. I'm just click on hybrid imagery just for now. And you'll see this other really nice layer that pops in that has reference labels and so forth that appear in there, that's very similar to the NAPE imagery. When I brought that in there, you see the world imagery comes down to the bottom, and then you see the titles of the roads still. Because up at the top of your drawing order, there'll be a hybrid reference layer. That's sometimes useful for when you're creating maps, is just to get that hybrid reference layer in there, just so we can see road names. That actually came up on a project I was working on like a week ago or so. Someone was asking how to get those labels over the top of their imagery. Might drag that down though, just so it's closer to where I want it to be. One thing about a base layer though is you can't do any kind of analysis on it, but you can off of some raster layers that come in, and when a raster or a vector for that matter come in, they're called services. So there's a layer service. Those, depending on the rules of that hosted feature or raster online, the service that it provides allows you to do some things on it, but not others. In the case of NAPE imagery, though, which is neat, if I turn on the LRIC boundary, and I just want to jump into a very common tool that we use a lot of the time for analysis, is clip raster. Is we could, and I won't do it right now because it takes too much time for a layer this large. We can go up to analysis, and we will do this step on a different layer here in a bit, but I like redundancy for learning sometimes. Analysis, click on tools, and type in clip raster. And if I selected that, what I could do is click and select that NAPE. You see how I can't select the base layer below that, the base map that we can get through ArcGIS Pro, but I can select the NAPE imagery. So I can clip that and then do analyses with that layer. I'm not going to do that because it takes a while with this large of a data set. We'll do it with a smaller one shortly. But we can clip that and get it in there. What we can do is we can then back up if we want. And one thing I do like to do sometimes is I like to right click and add to my project favorites, or just add to favorites in general. So I like to have clip raster be one of mine. So I right click that, and then I added it to my favorites. We'll see how that works in the shortly. Yes.
Can I interrupt for a quick second?
Yes, sir.
We have someone asking if the NAPE layer that you're adding right now, is that inside ANR's portal, or are you bringing it in from somewhere else?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And I'm glad that, I gloss over some things like that. This is coming from online. So when I added this, so here, I'm going to show you a little something that's the way to look at that. And thanks for relaying that. It's hard to look at the chat at the same time. I've got so many windows open. So the over here in the contents pane, like 99% of the time I have it set to display by drawing order. But next to that, there's an option that shows, and usually if I hover over it, it will show that is draw by data source or list by data source. I'm going to click on the list by data source and stretch this over. And to answer, this is, by the way, a way of answering your question. You can see that the first one is, this is in the C drive. This is in the C drive in the boundary layer. And then the C drive here, let's look when we get down here to the NAPE imagery, if we go all the way down, look at the source. It's through an HTTPS nape.arcgis.com. So it's actually pulling that layer from online into your project. So it's an active connection that's web-based. If I were to do this clip or raster, what it would do is it would save it to your project, to your local machine. That way you don't have to rely on that online access. And it would clip that view to the and then bring it into your project. You do, if you're actually publishing the stuff, that you have to like give credit where credit's due sometimes to report where it came from. So you want to that's one of the reasons why I looked at the metadata, because you could include that, and we'll show where you can add that in your final map when we do it later. But yeah, that's simple answer. That NAPE is coming from online.
And it's one other thing. It's not our ArcGIS Online. It's actually coming directly from the NAIP's ArcGIS Online account. So that should be NRCS. Is that right, Sean?
Yes, NRC, National Resource Conservation Service, branch of the USDA.
Yeah. So
Yes.
the question was it ours or Berkeley's as well? So I just wanted to follow up with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also those are all, yeah. And I bring up NAPE, by the way, because this is such a valuable resource. I mean, like having this available every 2 or 3 years, you can get the newest updated version of this. And if you need back layers of this, reach out to us. We have them collected within our organizational accounts, I believe. So Shane would know more on that, but anyways, yeah, you can reach out to the office hours to find, like, if you want to change detection between years and that sort of thing. But see, now I'm listing my data source. I'm going to switch back to list by order because this is a lot easier to understand. Good. I just wanted to bring that in there just for reference. So let's go down to the bottom of your contents. I'm going to squish this down so you can, it's not overwhelming in the pane. I'm going to turn off my NAPE imagery. I'm going to actually turn off my hybrid reference layer, and I'm going to turn off my world imagery also for now. So I don't need either of those really up. I might go up and turn on some of my other layers, like my LREC projects, just so you can see just kind of a reference of where there are orchards on the facility, because now we're going to start working towards what we'll end up with on our final map. And one of those, another way of bringing in data, because someone asked about how can you show how to bring in data again. We're going to do another, again, a separate way, but this time again, bringing in online data. I'm going to go up to view. I know just that my catalog pane is actually down here under catalog, because the way my GIS is set up, it leaves them over each other. But in case, just for ease, you can go to view and catalog pane, and it'll pop up. This is a lot like the catalog view, but just condensed. And under portal, we'll click on portal. You'll see the first one is my content. That's all my ArcGIS Online content, my favorites, my groups. So if I belong to groups within my organization, then I have my organization's data. There's ArcGIS Online data and Living Atlas. Living Atlas is a whole nother thing that could be, it's much deeper. It's similar to the ArcGIS Online content though. It's all kinds of like demographic data that you used to have to pay like a lot of money for, that's now at your fingertips. I mean, I'm referring to like census data and things like that are available in there. Back to the ArcGIS Online though, let's click that little cloud. So under the catalog pane, portal, click the cloud by itself for ArcGIS Online. And then we'll type in LREC for Lynn Cove Rec, Research and Extension Center, _ trees. And click enter. And the first thing that pops up is going to be Lynn Cove trees that we have published. I actually republished this. It was originally, I think Robert published it, but then I made a couple edits and then republished it and cleaned it up a little bit. And so you can see the owner the date modified, and then the pathway to it. And so that path, it's going to draw this in again, like the NAPE imagery from online. And so what I'll do is right click that and click add to current map. Good. So there's a tree point for everywhere on the research center. But we don't want to do any kind, I mean, to analyze all of these trees or to map all of these trees is just going to be too much. It just will be way too much. If you go over to your map, you can see that this now appeared at the top of our drawing order. And then strangely, it put the LREC trees and then LREC trees down below it. I don't particularly like that. ArcGIS Online started doing that a couple of years ago, and I just wish it was the way it was before, where I can just draw it out and have it on top. I don't need it within a folder of its own, but it doesn't really matter a lot. I just grabbed it and I pulled it out, and then I can remove the folder that it was in. That's not really super important, but just kind of a preference for myself. So within this, now I want to show you, this is where I want to look into querying information about vectors. This applies to vectors or point lines and polygons as opposed to like rasters. If I right click on this, I can go to the attribute table. So each one of these features, each point is a feature with a feature ID number that runs down the side. And then there's a FID, LOL, REC. So these are the feature ID tree numbers so each tree has its own unique ID. And then there's some other information about it, like the RC, the field. So what field it is. If you remember, I think we're working on 41 North is the tree field that we're going to be mapping today, but you can see the field and number. And then if I scroll over to the side, there's name and point. We are just interested in the field 41 North. If you're not sure which field it is, well, we have it already named over here, but we can also go and click on the map. If we go map, explore, we can click on that map and it'll show us tree numbers and information, and it shows like the field that's available there. So F41 North. But we don't, that's just for like exploring your data. Let me look at the chat. I saw something good, cool. What we want to do is select just those trees. And there's a variety of ways that you can do it. One way, and I'll just show it, just that you don't have to do this, but you can use the selection tool and highlight an area. It's going to try to highlight whatever is that you drew over the top of. So you see like the trees then are turned to this cyan color. If I did it over here, it would be something similar. You can do it spatially using the selection tool here. And remember, if you get into the selection tool and you want to get out, you can go over to explore and it'll take us out of there. We can also click on this little clear option. This is important to remember sometimes. Well, it's often important to remember, because if you do any form of analysis when you have something selected, it only does the analyses on that specific area that's selected. So I'm going to clear it. That's one way to select. The other way is through a query. And when you're working with really large data sets or complex data sets, you might want to search for query by attributes. So in this case, I want to select by attributes because I still have the LREC tree table, the attribute table open. If you don't, right click here. You accidentally closed out of that, right click, attribute table, and then it'll show up LREC trees. And then we're going to select by attributes. It's a fairly common step. Now, what do we want to select? Select by type. And so new selection is good, is what we're shooting for. And what do we want to do? We're going to select a field. So what we're going to select is the in this case, the field name. So field, if we look on, if I move this out of the way, you can see field has the number of the field on it. So we'll select field is equal to, I'd say let's make it more like begins with, is easier. It's like more room for error. And if we do the drop down, we can see F41 North. Click that and click apply. And you'll see it'll get the same results as we had before with that. Just all the trees in that field are now selected. Now we can close this and we just say, okay, and it closes out. Now we only want to have those trees. Now remember, if anyone was working with this data, this stuff is also in the file folder that I added if you don't have ArcGIS Online access. That might be more for people that are on watching this on the YouTube later on, but just know that these trees are also included in that file folder. You might just have to go get those there instead of from the searching for ArcGIS Online. So now let's export these. And I'm combining two things in the exercise directions together right now for efficiency's sake, is to both subset the data, but also at the same time change its projection to the map that we're working on. Because if we're going to do analysis between a tree point and the location in a raster below it, we want to have them in the same projection. We won't really get into that too much. Well, we play with it, but we won't get into it too much. But just knowing that that's like a good idea is something important. So how we do that is we're going to go up to analysis at the top, the analysis tab, and tools. It shows clip raster is the last thing I use, so I'm going to just X out of that. Oh, actually, another way to do this even easier than this. Let's forget that. Let's go down to the LREC trees, right click on that, go down to data, and export features. Technically, you could type in export features over on the geoprocessing, but let's just do it the easy way. So right click, export features. And from here, we're going to have the LREC trees because that's what we're selected on. Okay, use selected records. So we have 124 trees that were selected. And then we're going to give the name of the export. By the way, this will export it by default to our geodatabase that was created when we first created ArcGIS, the project. You can export it as a shape file. Say if you, I don't know, for whatever reason, I like to work within geodatabases when I can. But if you need to send it to someone separately from a geodatabase, you might want to like put a file location, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's change the name of it though. Because this, if I click on this, you can see that it's deep down in here, this GDB. Behind the workshop exercise GDB, let's just go over that final section of the text, and let's call this, oh, and by the way, you can't start with a number in a geodatabase. You have to start with a letter, which is fine, because we're going to go F41 North, or N. You'll notice that GIS people often put underscores. You don't always have to have them. Underscores or dashes, but some functions it will break if you have a space, for example. So GIS folks tend to work with a lot of underscores. Underscore, let's see, trees. Underscore UTM, and I'll show you why it's going to be a UTM right now. Because we're going to change the projection when we export it at the same time. And how we do that is once we've typed that in, so you can see where I have it here at the end of the output feature class, it's going into the geodatabase. I'll go up to environments and click on environments. And then under the drop down for the output coordinate system, this is the way that you're going to want to do it. So follow this. So under a coordinate system, select current map, and it'll give you WGS WGS 1984. That's the datum. That's the anchor point of the projection, and then the Universal Transverse Mercator Zone 11 North. Don't do what I'm about to do. And so just leave it like that, but I will show you another way that sometimes you have to do it, is you'll have to click on this select coordinate system. Again, don't do this. Select on that. I have a bunch of favorites selected, but if you know coordinate systems well, you can then navigate down through all of these different options to find the same thing. Northern Hemisphere, WGS 84, Zoom Zone 11 North. I could right click that and make it a favorite like I have in the past, but that, and then select it. But that'll get me to the same place as what we have right here. Which is, again, so what you'd want to do is the drop down in the current map, because the first layer that came in was in that, and that's what we might do the cross analysis with. Good. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to export, and at the same time, we're going to change the coordinate system of the output that comes out. Once that's all done, sometimes you want to flip back, look at your parameters again, make sure everything is good, and it is, and then click OK. Good. Now, it's still highlighted because we have the selection already selected. So what we'll do is we'll go back up here to map. We can do it a couple ways. One, we can go over, we can click on it here with the clear, but you can also down here in the table of contents, we can click the top left corner and it'll clear the selection there. So we can clear the selection there. We can click the top corner. A lot of people don't realize that's the way you can do it also. Now it looks the same, right? But if we turn off the LREC trees, then everything else disappears and we only have the sets of the layer sets that we actually really want. Cool. I'm gonna now, one more thing that I want to do, and then we'll take a 5-minute break, is to join this together with the pack line data. So each one of these trees, and by the way, there's like some of this data has been massaged from old data that's combined in here that's for these trees, because it's like the dates are offset from the imagery to the pack line data, and I made a little bit of edits there, but the concept remains the same. Each one of these trees, if I open, you can see the attribute data still. Actually, we have LREC trees up. We can close that, right click on the UTM data and open up the attributes, and you'll see there'll be 124, if you look at the very bottom, selected that are available. And it has various information, including the FID that's with those trees, the FID for LREC. Those are the tree numbers. So each of these trees has an RFID tag on them. And when the fruit is collected off these trees, those trees are bent into groups of fruit that then are run through this pack line conveyor that measures the heck out of the trees or the fruit, and then has a table of data that comes out. Well, that table of data is the pack line data that we see down here. If I right click on that and click open, what we'll see is the same LOL rec FID number that matches up, but it doesn't have a spatial reference like what we're seeing on the screen here. But we can join these together, so we can see the weight, the diameter, the volume, the visual grade, and overall roundness. There's more attributes that are collected, but I just narrowed it down to these for now for mapping purposes. But this doesn't have spatial reference. This is like an Excel sheet, essentially, CSV as we brought it in. But what we can do is combine these two with a join function. And how we do that is we go up to this layer that we created, right click on that, and then you see down about halfway joins and relates. So at the top of your map, the F41 North, trees UTM, right click, joins and relates, and select add join. So in the input, so we recognize the input because we're already on the layer. the input field, we're going to click not the FID, but the FID LOL rec. And what it does is it automatically recognizes that another one of the layers in here, including the Packline CSV, has an FID LOL rec attribute that matches to it. So it automatically fills that in. You don't have to worry about validate join for right now, and let's just click OK. So here's where it gets cool. Now, if I drag this up from the bottom again, from the attribute table, we're on the 41 trees north UTM. Now, if I'm gonna move my zoom bar. If I scroll over this direction, you'll see now it has the weight, the diameter, the volume of all of those trees that we just linked together or joined together with that Excel sheet. So recombining that conveyor belt, those conveyor belt measurements back with the spatial reference points. Good. All right. I think that's a good spot to stop right now, because just for 5 minutes, just because when we come back, we have just the perfect amount of time to play with some cartography and make that final map that looks like this, because we have all of the right elements in there. We have to do one raster clip, and then the rest of it is cartography, the fun part. Good. So let's stop until like 3:26, and we'll finish it up from there. All right. Now we've made it most of the way through here. Again, we're down to the cartography section with one little clipping raster step that we want to make to get all the pieces that we'll need for the final map. Bring up my project. So again, we're going to get to the point where we can make a map that looks a lot like this. We have time. I might even show you how to do this shadowing here. That's kind of neat, but that's sort of like just a extra step for fun. That's usually a little bit more advanced. You know, when it comes to making maps, that doesn't come up very much. So you don't necessarily have to do that, but to create the rest of these map elements, that's it's quite useful. So with that, we are at this step right here. We've combined this layers together to create this layer and a data set to have these attributes combined with this layer here. And let's clean some things up now, just to make it so it's a little more apparent. Well, I'm going to actually, yeah, I'll just close these out for now. And we can zoom out a little bit. We see we have more stuff than we need here. It doesn't look like we have the pieces for a map quite yet set up, but we do. We will want to select and turn on the F41 North field and turn on the mosaic, because you see the mosaic spans a larger area than we need. We just want to have the field, again, to create this map that looks like this. And the way we do that is we'll go down and highlight the 41 North by default, and I say by default, but conventionally you will want to highlight whatever you're working on, because some of the conditional ribbon tools won't work if you don't. And what we'll do is we'll go up to the analysis, select tools, and then we'll go to favorites. And if you added it as a favorite, you should have on here clip raster as being one of them. If not, you can always type in clip raster to get it up. Clip raster, and we'll select that. From here, we'll select the drop down and select the F41 North mosaic is the first one, at least in my set, it shows up first. F41 drone MS mosaic. We'll select the output extent as being the F41 north field. Move my zoom window a little teeny bit so I can see everything appropriately. It gets hugged into the corner a little bit. We're going to go down. We're going to select on the use the input feature for clipping geometry. This is really important to make sure that it clips just along the outside of that F41 north field. We don't have to select the maintain clipping extent though. Just the first one is fine. So use this one here. Good. Nothing else will need to be changed. We can even leave the name as F41 North Mosaic Clip. That's fine. It clips what we're doing, so we're gonna have a good result. But you could change the name if you really wanted to there. But instead, we're just gonna clip run. It won't take very long. Unlike what the NAPE imagery would have been, it would have taken quite a long time. Good. So it clipped it. And now you see it come in and it switched back to band 1, 2, and 3. But I don't know if you recall, actually, it should have been 5, 3, 2. So we want to change that again in here. So the way we do that is we right click on the layer that just showed up under, and assuming your computer's roughly as fast as mine is, hopefully that showed up. I'll give it a second if it hasn't. We'll go to red, right click, select 5. Green, we'll select band 3. I just know this from, see, we can look at it as this for a reference. And then blue, we'll click band 2. We can turn off the one below it now. And you can see we just have that layer that we're interested in. You can scroll into it. We can see all the points that are laid over the top. You could change the symbology of it, but it looks pretty okay to me right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. And what I mean by change the symbology of it is, and don't worry about doing this, I'm just going to show you. I'm going to click on it here, go up to raster layer, and we can change the stretch type to standard deviation if we wanted. It's going to look really similar to that though. So if you wanted to, you could have done that raster layers stretch type, but it's going to look pretty close to the same as if we had the default. Good. Now we have all these tree points, these tree UTM layers that are over the top. We can turn off everything else, by the way. See the projects below. So now we just have that layer in here that's slightly diagonal. That's just based on the projection system. We could change the projection system if we really wanted to have it kind of face more square in our pane, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But what we do want to do is add some symbology related to the weights of those trees because that's part of the purpose of joining those layers. So what we'll do is we'll click on the F1 or F41N trees, UTM. We'll go up, select the drop down under symbology. So click on feature layer at the top and then the drop down under symbology. And then we're going to go down until we get to proportionate symbols and select that. So what it did is by default, it went with the proportionate symbols. Wait a minute, hold on a second. Graduated colors. Oh, graduated symbols, my bad. So I meant graduated symbols. So select graduated symbols. There we go. That's what I meant to say. Graduated symbols. So now you see this odd, like kind of nonsensical, like sizing of these symbols. And that's because when it came in, it's basing the graduation of the sizes by the FID number. And we don't want that. That's see how that shows up on the right-hand side? What we really want is something like the weight. So I can do that drop down. So if you see, you should still have the symbology up on the right-hand side of your screen. Select under field, weight. And then that will change considerably. Good. And there's 5 classes. That's fine. maximum, minimum. We could change that. We can do the maximum size at 22 and it'll make it a little bit more pop out if we wanted to. We can use the template color. We can select that color there and change it to something that maybe contrasts a little bit better with the trees. Like select the color of something like yellow, maybe. Click apply. And then it pops out a little bit more. Just a kind of a side. There's something called a squint test. If you squint and it pops out more, that kind of emulates a little bit what color blindness might see. So, but not always, but so just kind of a rough way of looking at it. There's other ways to do that too, by changing the colors and more by color properties. You can get color values, hex codes from like Color Brewer online to get color blindness kind of good templates, but we won't worry about that right now. We just made it yellow. That again will match up nicely with the project that we did it before. So this here, by the way, is one place where sometimes I could get into how to edit features. I don't want to do that too much right now because it would burn time. But what I could do, don't do this yourself. I could go to edit and then I could modify, I could click on these features, select them, and then create or modify and then resave them if I wanted to adjust their positions. Don't do that right now. It's in the directions, but I just want to mention that's an option. Good. Now what we have though is a map that is of interest that matches up to what our objective is. There's other steps that you can do that are also in the directions, like you can do a spline that you can create. You can create like a stretch, like colorization of these values. In fact, I could do it really quick. Don't do this because it'll take you a little bit of time, might get you off track, but I can go to the analysis, tools, spline. Don't do this again. I'm going to put in the input features, the UTM, the trees. I'm just going to leave the default value. I don't want to do it off that. I want to do it off weight and regulate and then run. And then I can have another layer that pops out like this that shows where there's a gradient of what's the larger or less large quantities or weights of fruit. Well, we don't need to worry about that right now. For our final map, I just want to let you know that is in the directions. Good. Let's go and create a layout view though. A layout, as opposed to the map, remember the layout is where you put in your legend, your neat lines, your titles, and that kind of thing. Things called map elements. And how we do that is we go up to view at the top of the screen. And, excuse me, we go up to insert, my bad. And over to the left, you'll see a new layout. Just click on new layout. And go down to the ANSI landscape letter horizontal, like I'm the first option there, and select that. And what you'll see is a new view pop up in a layout view. Now it's blank though. This throws people off initially if you're used to the little ArcMap particularly, because there's a little different way of doing it. In what you do there is you go up and select map frame, drop down, and we'll select the map that we want. But it still doesn't do anything. But when we go up and we go to the corner, and if you're near the corner, it'll snap to it. We'll click with your left button, drag it all the way across into the bottom right-hand corner and let go, and then you'll have it pop in. Now here's the thing, is that now it treats this as you'll see on the side, it shows your map frame. That's the map frame coming from here, and I can reduce that. If I try to grab and move this, it moves the map frame, not the actual data within the map. If we want to resize or change the position of the map within this map element, the map frame, what I need to do is right click on it and select activate at the top. Now we can use the roller to zoom it up a little bit or out if we want, because it's not really playing well because of the scale that I have mine at. This seems too small. This seems too big. And you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a scale option. 1 to 550 is too small. 1 to 355 is too big. So let's just change that number to 4. In my case, I'm going to click 4. And then that makes it roughly the size that I want it. I can also grab it and drag it a little bit just to position it how I like it. Something like kind of centered, maybe a little below center, and then it's good. But I want to do other things now. I want to add other map elements in there. And to do that, I'm going to need to get out of the activation of this. So what I need to do is I go up and click on layout at the top and select close activation. So again, if you would have to go up to layout, select that, and then close activation. And now it'll be back to where I can add in other elements. Specifically, let's add in a title. And so still in insert, we're going to be all working from insert almost now. Insert, and you'll see across here, you'll see a bunch of options like these letters. I've got mine kind of condensed, so I might do the drop down to get it more options. I want to just do a straight text. That is an option here, straight text. I'll click on that. And somewhere across the top, I'm going to just drag and make a box. And you'll see a text will automatically show up here in the top of your layout. So this is the map element is tied to this. If I right click and get properties or double click it, you'll see it show up the map element on the other side. I'm going to close the geoprocessing and symbology and all of these because I don't need those anymore right now. So you can see text is over here and it just comes in as text. I'm going to type in something else like Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center. And when I click enter, oops, we don't need enter. When I click back on my map, it's going to extend, but it's way too big. We don't want that. That's way too big. So let's go back and double click on the text again. And let's change the text symbol. So when we double click, the properties come up. I go up to text symbol and click on that. And you can see that its size is 53. That's ridiculous. Let's do something more like 36. Just type in 36. You can do the drop down, but I'm going to just click 36 and enter. And then I click back on there. Oops. Oh, apply. I'm sorry. My zoom was partially covering it. I have to go down to the bottom and click apply. And now that's a better text size. And I can drag that up a little bit to wherever I want it on my map. Good, something like that. By the way, if I do the scroll now, you'll see it zooms in and out of the map view. Or excuse me, the layout view. But now we've changed the text symbol. That's a little bit more appropriate. Let's repeat that with a kind of a tagline. I'm going to click the straight text again. Do another box down below that. And I believe what I had on the other map was naval orange production. And then if I click off, it should show up, but I don't like the size of it again. So again, now this is text 1 at the top. By the way, you can change the names of these. Like I might slowly click the first one and change it to title. I might slowly twice click the next one to change it to subtitle. Sometimes you want to do that for organization purposes. And then I'll double click the subtitle again to have it come up on the right-hand side. Let's click the symbol, and instead of the 50 something, let's do more like 28 and click apply. And then it's more appropriate size. You can drag it up a little bit. You'll see there's a snap line that automatically matches it up with the Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center across the top. You might even still want to drag these a little bit further over to the side. We might change the sizes of them a little bit because of the next thing that we'll do might overlap, but it's okay. You can always play with those text sizes like we did before. Next step, let's put a neat line in. Neat line is just like just a little bit of cartographic effect that makes it nice. And the way you can do that is insert again at the top. And hopefully this isn't too quick. So insert. I'm going to go over to the drop down on the graphics texts, and you'll see down below, you'll see a polygon option. So if you do insert, do the drop down by the text options at the right hand top down and select polygon. Now I can click and drag a polygon all the way across between those two and let go. And in here, we can have the option for symbol, for changing the symbol styles. Click on that and do the color as something like a darkish blue. So see we do the rectangle, select symbol on the right-hand side of the top of the element pane. Select blue as the color and click apply. Now that neat line is way too big, so what I can do is I can zoom in, grab it, and make it narrower. So it's just a clean line across there. And then when I zoom out, it looks kind of nice. Good. Next, let's add a couple more map elements in there. I'm going to try to get this so it's centered right. Good. Other important elements typically are the legend, for example, is a great one. Let's do that. Insert a legend over across the top. So you see insert tab. Make sure you're probably already there by default. Go across the top. Under legend, don't click on legend. Just click the drop down below it. You can see the various options. We'll just click but I just want to show you that for the options. If I click the top, just click it once. It'll go with the first option, and all I need to do is come down and drag a box on the bottom of my screen. What you'll see is way more legend elements than you possibly want. We're also seeing it's kind of getting crowded because the map frame is a little bit lower than we need. If you remember how to adjust that, let's do that right now. And that is, we will go right click on the center, select activate, and we can drag that up a little bit, put it where we want it, go up to layout, and close activation. But don't worry if you don't need to do that. You might have already put it in the right place to start with yourselves. But we have this legend down the bottom. Now, if I click on that again, you'll see that if I adjust it and move it out, it'll change the size of it. But we have more stuff in there than we want. It doesn't make sense to have like RGB and all that kind of stuff in there. So let's get rid of that. And the way we do that is we see that the legend is popping up on the left-hand side and has all these check marks. And these are all of the different layers within the map over here that are showing up. And we only want the trees. So what we do is go down and uncheck everything else on that legend. And then it'll only show what we're interested in. The only thing though is that, do we really want to have like what, six decimal places out? That's kind of crazy. You can do a couple things. One, you can convert this to graphics and change that, which I don't recommend because it's just, it can be less efficient in the long run. if you want to make any changes to your map, these are already tied to the sizes in here. If you do that, those things can get disconnected and issue at different scales. So what we can do is we can go back to the map. So this map is calling from this map element, the map frame is calling from the map. Same thing with the legend, is calling that data from the map. What we can do is go up to that map. Don't accidentally hit the X, by the way. Click on map. The trees at the top. Let's click on that. Go up to feature layer. So again, we clicked on the map. Don't exit on accident. Click on the map. Go to the trees. Highlight that. Click the feature layer. And then click symbology. I cleared out so we see symbology. So the way we get rid of those lots of decimal places is we go, if I remember right, all the way over to the right hand side, format labels, the drop down. And then we're going to lower this down from six decimal places to something like 1 decimal place is plenty. Good. Now, one other thing, I don't particularly like this saying F41 North trees UTM. Let's change the name of that, and that change will be reflected in our layout. So let's just say navel oranges. Change the name here. It doesn't change the file name, it just changes the name in the display. And then under weight, we can click on that twice slowly. Weight. You can say weight in LBS or weight in pounds. I think LBS is what I put on the other one, but that's fine. And then enter. Now check this out. We go back to the layout. Don't exit on accident. Click on the layout, and you'll see that it has the navel oranges, weight in pounds, with the dots on top of the trees. Last couple little steps that we might do to finish up this map is we can add in a north arrow. That's super easy. So we're going to go insert, north arrow. You can have a bunch of options. I like simple north arrows, so I'll just select the first one and drag it and drop it on here. And we have a nice little north arrow. You can play with that if you want. Sometimes you want to put in a scale bar. So we're still on insert. Let's do a scale bar, but let's do the drop down. And since we're in pounds, let's stick with imperial. And so let's pick one that we like. I like having it be when it's down below the area of interest. I prefer the lines, the tick lines to be facing downward. So let's pick number 3 and drag that across the bottom here. Good. But it's in miles. And I mean, come on, 0.1 mile. Who knows? Is that like good reference? So let's change that. We can also stretch it out so it's like more appropriately long. That doesn't make sense though. So what we can do, so we'll see that over in the drawing order, it showed up. So that element showed up in the drawing order. What we do is double click on that. And remember, the convention of, I'm going to X out of the symbology, the convention of most Esri products now have the adjustments on the right. So we double click on this to then make the adjustments on the right. The map units is in miles. That's crazy. So let's select feet instead. And 180 feet makes way more sense. Now, 2 other last things that we could add into this map is that we could add in like a title, a description, service credits. By default, sometimes this will create service credits that come in there. So say if I had some kind of layer in the background, like the NAPE, like NAPE imagery, or if I had if I went to the base map in here and added like the imagery from the background, it'll pop up at service credits. I'll If you ever want to know how to get rid of those service credits, they're kind of pesky. You can do it office hours, but really it's just about going into dynamic text and finding service credits and changing it. But we can add them in on our own too. And the one way that we could do that, and this is virtually always the way that I would do it, is I would insert text, straight line, and then I would type in my service credit information right here. Or you can do map description as well. That would be where you'd put in your map description. Let me change the symbol of this to something other than 27. Seems kind of large. Let's do like 22 or something like that and apply. And so this is where you could put that information in if you wished. Now we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to do a simplified version of a call out. This is really easy, and it takes 4 minutes should be plenty of time. And the way that we do this, so we have all of this looks just like this, right? Except for the map at the top. The map at the top is really easy to do. And the way you do it is you go over to Insert, do a new map. We'll turn off these 2 layers because we don't want those in the background of our call out. Go back to the original map, and we'll scroll down until we find the LREC boundary. Click on that, and then scroll back up. So then the F41 field, now this is important, click Control on your keyboard and then select it. Then right click and copy. We go back to map 1. Go and right click on that and paste. Those 2 layers will pop in there. Let's change their style just a little bit. We'll click the first one, just the box. You're following. So you remember you just copied and pasted these from the map. Right click. We'll change the properties. So we'll make the color of the field red. Click apply. Let me get rid of this map element so it sees it clear. And the LREC boundary, let's click on that. Just the box. And on this one, let's make the color like mid-gray. And then click apply. Good. Now we can go back to our layout. And from here, all we do is we go up and insert a new map frame, click the drop down, and we select the map. Now all we need to do is drag and drop this somewhere into the corner right-hand top corner of our map. You'll see that the scale isn't right. It's never quite right when it comes in. So we'll have to activate. By the way, we could change the text size to make it give us more room if we wanted to, but we don't need to worry about it for now. But from here, remember how we did this? We right-clicked and activated. And then we can scroll in and out until it fits in there just right. We could get the right size there. We could change the box size later if we wanted to, but we'll just leave it like that for now. And then go up to Layout, close activation. And the only last thing that we might want to do is get rid of that weird line around the outside of it. So if I click off of it, you see a line around it. Let's go and that's the new map frame. Let's double click on that. Over, I think it's the paintbrush, if I remember right. Yep. And then turn that line down to 0. Close these 2 out. And voila, we have a map that looks just like the map that we have here. Except for we could have changed the outline difference of the call out, but that's easy. You can always go back and do that if you wanted to. Good. All right. So hopefully that all went over, just ended right on the mark. Only last comment I'd like to make is to please fill out the evaluation form that Janot is going to send out to you shortly. We really appreciate the good, the bad, the ugly, and it serves to help us improve these workshops, but also show that we're providing a good service to all our colleagues. With that, any last questions? I'll be around, and I wish you all a very wonderful weekend. And if you have any any deeper questions, don't hesitate to use our office hours, Mondays and Tuesdays.